Great. Good afternoon and welcome back to Sunday's Angie's Answers. Today is May 10 and we have the hot topic in higher education for the week, and that is the gap year. This is a hot topic among our clients, students, parents, and it's also a hot topic in the news. And so we'll take a look at the gap year. And then after we look at the gap year, we'll look at tips for the week by grade, and then we will have time for your questions and thoughts at the end. So let's take a look at the gap year. What is it? And why are people talking about it now? And then we'll also talk about some of the benefits versus the risk of taking a gap year for students, especially during the COVID-19 situation. And so a gap year, you might have heard about it. It's actually something that's quite rare for students to actually do, though it's become more and more prevalent over the last decade. But still less than 10% of students who are going to go to university choose to take a year off of formal education after graduating from high school and before enrolling in college. And that is the definition of a gap year. That break in formal education between high school and college. Now, most students who do choose to take a gap year have already been admitted to university, and they request to defer or delay their start by 1 year so that they may engage in a different kind of structured program. Most gap years are incredibly structured, either through service projects or work and learning projects. And for the university to actually grant the request to defer for a year, students must present a structured plan for that year. Military service, that's mandatory, is a common one, but students who are not interested in taking a gap year for military purposes really need to come with a structured plan to present to universities when they ask for that deferral. And honestly, not all deferral requests are actually granted by the university. This week, one of our students received an email from University of Pennsylvania about their waitlist status, saying students who accept a place off of the waitlist are not eligible to request deferral or a gap year. And so what this means, if a student wants to take a gap year, applies to the university to which they've chosen to enroll by May 1, and the university declines that request, students either must enroll in the fall as they planned, or they must withdraw that application and reapply again in the next season. So let's take a look at some of the benefits and risks of a gap year, because this is not a normal year for a gap year. The pros, of course, are safety. And that is because most of the structured gap year programs involve travel for service or work, where now we're all in some level of isolation around the world for public health safety. Many students who do participate in a structured gap year note that it really helped them with their personal growth and maturity and understanding of their place in the world. Students who do take a gap year are likely to return to go to college after that year, about 90% according to some of the statistics. And of course, the benefit of tuition savings for the year. However, right now, those structured experiences that most students choose to do for gap year, they don't exist either. They don't have the travel programs, they don't have the work study programs. So students in this COVID-19 gap year would need to tailor-make a year-long schedule of experiential learning or independent learning experiences. And I'm kind of joined here today with Paul, who also a counselor at Hale. Paul, what were we talking about just before we went live? Something about some of the options that students traditionally would have for a gap year versus what they would be limited to now.
Right. So, I mean, traditionally, like you were saying, service trips, volunteering, those are very common sorts of ventures to go on. Or things like work experiences, personal projects, whether that's research or running a business, something along those lines. Those are all valid reasons to take a gap year, valid ways to sort of structure a gap year. But obviously, this year because of the ongoing kind of public health crisis, traveling is restricted. You know, companies are sort of restructuring the way that they operate, so working from home, things like that. So traditional internships are kind of absent in the way that they were before. So at least to me, it feels like students who are perhaps working on independent research projects or who have independent businesses or startups that they have perhaps created or are working for, those students can kind of justify their gap year based around those options. But some of the more traditional paths, the ones that are kind of externalized, so things like the service trips, the work experience, things like that, I have a feeling that those options are sort of disappearing, at least for students.
Yeah, yeah, especially at this time. So even a gap year is limited in what it can do. But when we talk about the pros of gap year, they exist. But as a former admissions officer and someone who's lived on campuses for many years, there is a huge con that proponents of gap years don't like to talk about. And this is students who actually do take that year off. While they are 90% likely to go back to college, they are half as likely to graduate, which is to be absolutely terrifying. This is a humongous risk because the graduation rates of US universities were garbage to begin with. And this is something that we talk about in some of our workshops, especially with parents. For students who go on a gap year, according to the National Post-Secondary Student Aid Study, which was a recent study done on behalf of this is a group that helps the National Center for Educational Statistics of the US to gather data. And they found that, in 4 years, while the US average graduation rate is 44.2% for students to earn their undergraduate degree in 4 years, is the normal. Students who took a gap year, it was 20.8%. And even after 6 years, only 41.4% of students who took a gap year in their survey actually graduated from college. This is a huge, tremendous risk. And another con to taking a gap year, aside from risking ability to graduate, has to do with you could possibly earn less financial aid. And this is mostly for domestic students who applied for financial aid or financial assistance, or even for scholarships. You would need to reapply for that. And traditionally, students who take a gap year will get about a 5% decrease in their award, which is something that I don't quite understand. But that is also a trend that the NPSAS has discovered as a con in taking a gap year. And so for those who are wondering what happens, why are the graduation rates so low? And if you think about it, it does have to do with study momentum. In high school, students are building this momentum to get through to university. It's usually a seamless go from flat ground up the hill to graduation, and the hill being the college education, top being the graduation from this. But when students take a break from formal structured education, it is akin to stopping at the bottom of the hill and saying you're going to get to the top without walking or stopping. And just as in the law of physics, for whatever reason, this reproduces itself in educational experiences, students find that incredibly difficult to actually achieve, rather than if they had just kept that momentum going from one structured learning environment to another. And so if you or someone you know and love is considering a gap year, please note they are not for everyone. And do discuss the pros and cons with a consultant related to your specific situation, and if a gap year is a choice, how can we hedge the risks to keep you moving forward learning. And Paul, do you have anything else to add on gap years before we go into the tips of the day and questions?
Yeah, I think if you're talking about sort of like you were saying, how taking a gap year is sort of, halting your momentum just as you're starting to climb the hill. I think of this especially with students going into technical fields, things like engineering, things like computer science. So much of that technical knowledge can be lost within a year, especially if the student isn't necessarily kind of flexing those intellectual muscles during the year. So particularly for those fields, I think this gap is probably especially pronounced just because there's so much technical knowledge required. And, sure, you will learn that whenever you actually go to college. But if you're, like you said, kind of forsaking that structured learning environment for the gap year sort of format, it can really hurt you going into those fields. I think that's where it's especially pronounced.
Yeah, I have to agree. And so it's really kind of an unpleasant situation because not a lot of students are excited about the possibility of doing online learning in the fall for their first semester of college, right? Because you spent so much time imagining the campus experience and learning from your classmates as well as the independent living learning component of that. But online learning for many students would be the smarter route. But again, each student has their own path. And so do connect with your consultant to discuss these pros and cons before making that kind of commitment one way or another. All right. So let's quickly go into, I'm not sure why we need to go back through the slides. I think I need to get a different kind of Prezi background, which here we go. Let's go for the week's tips. This is a rundown for the class of 2020. Many of the students this week have received I-20 visa invitations in the mail. Or alternatively, like from Purdue last week, they've received notice that they would not be issuing I-20 visas until further notice. So for those of you who are receiving your visa invitations, schedule 1.5 to 2 hour sessions with your consultant to go over, paying that CBIS fee, getting these application forms done, and standing in line waiting for that visa whenever the consulates should open again. And if you haven't received it, keep checking your portals to see if you've gotten any updates or news. For the class of 2021, these next 2 weeks are a pretty big deal for those of you who are taking AP exams. They are beginning. And remember to prep your books in advance because they are short exams. Though they are open book, if your book isn't prepared, it's kind of like going through this giant chaos. So go ahead and get those done in advance. And remember to mark your calendars if you didn't do it last week for the week of May 26th, because this is when the College Board will announce when it will open registration for the fall exams. And remember that the SAT subject tests are not available every date this fall. They're only available in August, October, and is it November and December, Paul? I've just done a complete blank. I just know they're not available in September.
I would have to check too, honestly. I don't remember off the top of my head either because things have been changing so rapidly.
In the next one, like absolutely confirmed, but we do know that there will be full SAT exams available every month between August and December. And those spaces are going to fill very quickly because both the class of 2021 and the class of 2022 are seeking those spots. Many in the class of 2021 are already working on first, second, and third drafts of their personal statements. Keep it up. Remember to attend aggressively to your extracurricular initiatives in the class of 2021 because this is the summer and the time where you really launch yourself into leadership and initiative. So it's kind of an important time to keep those new things that you just created for online experiences moving forward. And then do sign up for online sessions and newsletters for the favorite colleges on your school list. Begin getting those demonstrated interest points. For the class of 2022, also mark your calendars for May 26th to register for those exams. Many of you will take your first exam in the fall. And possibly some of you are prepared to take some of the subject tests already as well. So go ahead and be aware and watch for that announcement for registration. You can also sign up for online sessions and newsletters for schools on your recommended college list from your consultant. The extracurricular theme for you guys is focus and skill. And if you really need to continue to assess your activities health and discuss what's going on with your consultant. A lot of schools right now are really dumping on the work, and it's kind of difficult to make time to keep growing outside of class. And so speak with your consultants about how to adjust your timeline on those projects. And again, continue the college list conversation with family and consultant, and continue your writing practice. And then for those of you in the class of 2025 to 2023, it's time to develop a reading plan and work on your reading log and stick to this plan. Your extracurricular theme is exploration. And so are you exploring enough? Are there things that you've always wanted to try that you haven't had a chance to? Now is the time to get involved with some of those. And also practice some of that reflective writing with your consultant to develop some of those skills along the way. And parents, remember, if you've not already watched it, Building a Strategic School List is online. And if you've lost the links or didn't get the links and are still interested, please contact Hale for details. And that's pretty much it for the kind of like formal warm-up to topics this week. And now it's time for user questions. Does anyone have any questions? It does not have to be related to gap year or test prep. It could be any topic in higher education.
Also, I just want to jump in, clarifying the subject test sort of question we had earlier, whether or not they'll be available later. It looks as though oh wait, actually these are the 2019 dates. I'm sorry. Looking at the wrong.
Yes, they're available in August and October. I think there's a slight modification to the November ones, but I know September subject tests will not be available.
Yes. I'll keep trying to look for the updated schedule. My apologies, I was looking at the 2019 one.
Great. And so any of our participants today have any questions? Go ahead and type them in the Q&A box at the bottom of Zoom. So far, not seeing any of these. All right. So if there aren't any additional questions at this point in time, hopefully you found this information about gap years in the news this week of interest to you, as well as reminders of some of those tips. And again, as always, we look forward to helping answer any questions you have about the higher education process. And thank you for joining us today, Paul.
No problem. Thank you for having me, Angie.
All right, we'll go ahead and close it down, and we'll see you all next week when we look at the news of what's happening in higher education. Take care and have a good day.
Bye-bye.